Hello, my name's Peter Bleksley. I'm an author and a broadcaster, but for over 20 years before that, I was a cop. I'm here today to talk about the drastic need to reform our drug laws, because quite simply, the war on drugs cannot and will not ever be won. People are losing their lives. Millions of people have lost their lives over the years because of the war on drugs, and billions upon billions of pounds have been spent. And where's it got us? Quite frankly, not very far at all. Back in the early days of my police career, the drugs that we generally dealt with in Peckham in southeast London was cannabis. A few years later, I moved to Kensington when I became a detective, and there I came across a lot more drugs like cocaine, LSD, amphetamine and the like. But this is the early 1980s. The dawn of the cocaine explosion is upon us. And thereafter, of course, came the ecstasy generation, the rave generation, and the huge amount of people that were then taking MDMA. The drugs market is always changing. The drugs market is shaped by demand, and the supply will match that demand. And yet this industry, which globally is worth more than $500 billion a year, is left in the hands of organised crime. Criminals, villains, gangsters, they supply it all. Would we let organised crime run the NHS? Would we let organised crime run the railways? No, of course we wouldn't. And yet we leave these crooks in charge of this industry. No wonder so many lives are lost. For over 10 years I worked undercover, so I pretended to be a gangster. I bought guns, I bought drugs, literally millions and millions of pounds worth of drugs of all different descriptions, and sometimes I was a contract killer. So while I was pretending to be a drug dealer, I met with all manner of people who were supplying drugs. They came from all different stratas of society. Some of them were fun, some of them were gun-toting, psychotic, terrifying and very dangerous people. But they all had one aim: to make money. And that's what the industry allows them to do. And nothing has changed. And nothing will change until we have a drastic rethink about our drug laws and how we deal with the problem that is illegal drugs. The drugs industry is always evolving. The dealers, the wholesalers, the importers are always looking for different ways to carry out their business. And that really means that law enforcement is only ever playing catch up. They are always behind the curveball. And what we've seen in recent years is that drug dealers decided that there was a whole new market to be tapped into, which was outside of the big cities. So they took their goods, their drugs, out into the towns, the villages, the hamlets of the UK. And how did they do that? They employed an army of young people to carry out their dirty work for them. And some of these young people were extremely vulnerable, and they were bullied, threatened, coerced into transporting and selling these drugs. Yes, some of them were willing volunteers, but a considerable number were not. And so, to the middle-aged lady sitting in her comfortable cottage somewhere in the Cotswolds, reading her edition of the Daily Mail and thinking, drugs are bad, we should lock everybody up, let me say to her, actually, the drugs industry is on its way to your town or village or hamlet if it hasn't already arrived, and in all probability, it has.